I feel tremendous guilt. The year is 2017. A former Facebook executive stands before a crowd at Stanford, confessing his role in building a monster. We have created tools that are ripping apart the social fabric of how society works. His name is Chamath Palihapitiya, and in a few short years, this man warning about exploitation would become the poster child for a new kind of financial mania. From Facebook royalty to the king of SPACs to a podcast populist, this is the untold story of how one man fooled Wall Street, retail investors, and maybe even himself. He arrived in Canada at age 5, a refugee from the Sri Lankan Civil War. His family had nothing. His father, once a diplomat who had spoken out against violence, couldn't find steady work and spiraled into alcoholism. His mother cleaned houses to keep them afloat. They lived on welfare. In interviews, Chamath remembers the hyper-vigilance of his childhood, the constant fear. He even described his father making him go outside to pick the very tree branch he would be hit with. It was a life defined by what they didn't have, a life that taught him he was worthless. Any moment of joy was seared into his memory, like the one time a teacher bought him Dairy Queen, or the single cheesecake his family bought once a year on New Year's Eve. At 14, he got a job at Burger King to help pay the bills. He was ashamed. He'd see kids from his high school come in, and he'd just want to hide. But then, something shifted. He accepted it. This was his life, for now. And that hustle became his engine. He earned an engineering degree from the University of Waterloo, landed on a trading desk, and then jumped to Silicon Valley. He joined the music software company Winamp, and when AOL bought it, he became their youngest ever vice president. He was climbing. Fast. But he wanted more. We all fall down at some point. The question is, will you get back up? He wanted to be at the center of the universe. In 2007, he landed at Facebook. It was a rocket ship, and he was handed the controls for a new advertising system called Beacon. It was an immediate disaster. Beacon tracked user purchases on other websites and broadcasted them to their friends without clear consent. Privacy lawsuits piled up. Users were furious. It was a public relations nightmare. But Chamath didn't get fired. He pivoted. He was put in charge of growth. This is where the legend begins. He assembled a team with a single mandate: get more users at any cost. They were relentless. They engineered the dopamine-driven feedback loops he would later condemn. They created the "people you may know" feature, harvesting email address books to weave a global social web. And it worked. The growth team took Facebook from just 50 million users to over 1 billion. He was a hero inside the company, a master of exploiting human psychology for scale. His methods were effective, but they came with a price. Journalist Stephen Levy's book, Facebook: The Inside Story, revealed a darker picture behind the success. Former colleagues described his management style as aggressive, a relentless drive that left some subordinates in emotional distress. It was a pattern of pushing boundaries, no matter the human cost, in the pursuit of a goal. In 2011, he walked away. He was just 34 years old, holding Facebook stock that would soon be worth hundreds of millions of dollars. But leaving Facebook wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of something far more ambitious, a new chapter where he would try to fix the very system that made him rich, or so he claimed. He saw himself as an outsider ready to take on the establishment, a mindset forged in the hardship of his youth. He was now armed with immense capital and a powerful story. In 2011, With his Facebook fortune secured, Chamath launched Social Capital alongside his then-wife, Brigitte Lau. The pitch was brilliant. This wasn't just another venture capital firm. This was a mission. It was VC with a conscience. He told audiences he saw money not as a prize, but as an instrument of change. His new goal wasn't just to make more of it, but to deploy it against the world's hardest problems. He positioned himself as the anti-VC, the one who cared. His firm would tackle healthcare, education, and climate change, the problems other investors were too scared or too greedy to touch. And for a while, it looked like he was the real deal. Social Capital made early, successful bets on legitimate software companies like Yammer, Box, and a little startup called Slack. By 2015, the firm was managing over $1 billion. Chamath's public persona soared. He became a fixture on the conference circuit, a charismatic truth-teller railing against the system that made him. He spoke of his 50-year ambitions for social capital, of building businesses that would employ millions and positively affect a quarter of the world's population. He was building a modern-day Berkshire Hathaway, but with a soul. The defining moment came in 2017 at that now infamous Stanford talk. "I feel tremendous guilt," he confessed to a captivated audience. He admitted they all knew in the back of their minds that something bad could happen. The short-term, dopamine-driven feedback loops that we have created, he warned, are destroying how society works. He told the students to take a hard break from these tools. It was a stunning admission. The architect of Facebook's growth was now its most vocal critic. He was the insider who escaped the machine and was now warning everyone else of its dangers. He seemed to be atoning for his sins. But here's where the story gets complicated. Behind the scenes, the mission-driven rhetoric didn't always match reality. Whispers of the same aggressive, demanding tactics from his Facebook days began to surface around Social Capital. While he publicly preached patience, he privately pushed for returns. The idealist's mask was starting to show cracks. Then in 2018 came the pivot nobody saw coming. Chamath announced he was restructuring the firm. He was giving back all his investors' money and converting Social Capital into a family office. From now on, he would only be investing his own fortune. The official reason was to free himself to focus on long-term, audacious bets. But the unspoken truth was much simpler. No more investors meant no more accountability. No one to answer to. No one to question his methods or his motives. The guardrails were gone. And with his story perfected and his capital secured, Chamath was about to unleash a new kind of chaos on the market. With no partners to answer to, Chamath was free to pursue his grandest vision yet. In 2019, he launched Social Capital Hedosophia Holdings Corp. 1, his first special-purpose acquisition company, or SPAC. The pitch was intoxicatingly simple. A SPAC is a blank check company. It has no business, no product. It's just a pile of cash raised from the public with a promise to find a great private company and take it public through a merger. Chamath framed it as a revolutionary act of financial democracy. For decades, the best IPOs were reserved for Wall Street insiders. The little guy was always last in line, buying in only after the big money had already been made. SPACs, Chamath argued, changed that. Now, retail investors could get in on the ground floor, right alongside the pros. They could own a piece of the next Virgin Galactic before it ever hit the mainstream. And then he delivered. In October 2019, his first SPAC, IPOA, merged with Richard Branson's Virgin Galactic. The stock went ballistic. Chamath was no longer just a former Facebook exec. He was the SPAC King, a modern-day Midas. The market went wild, and he went into overdrive, launching a rapid succession of new SPACs, IPOB, IPOC, IPOE, and more. Each one came with a story, a charismatic founder, and a set of wildly optimistic growth projections. IPOB would merge with Opendoor, a company set to revolutionize real estate. IPOC would take Clover Health public, an AI-driven disruptor in healthcare. IPOE targeted SoFi, a fintech giant for a new generation. Chamath's Twitter feed became the engine of the gold rush. He wasn't just an investor, he was a movement leader. He tweeted rocket emojis. He talked about the people. He cultivated an army of followers who believed he was fighting for them, the retail investors who had been shut out for so long. "I'm doing this for the little guy," he proclaimed, positioning himself as a populist hero taking on the Wall Street establishment he so often criticized. He was giving them access, a seat at the table. It was a powerful, compelling narrative. But it hid a much darker truth, one buried in the fine print of every SPAC deal. Here's how the game really worked. When a SPAC is formed, the founders, known as sponsors, are given a special class of shares called the promote. Typically, this amounts to 20% of the entire company, purchased for a nominal fee, sometimes as little as $25,000. This is the sponsor's reward for finding and executing a deal. But the incentive it creates is profoundly misaligned. Because they get their shares for next to nothing, sponsors can make a fortune from the merger itself, even if the stock price collapses afterward. If the company they take public soars, they win big. If it crashes and burns, they still walk away with millions, while the retail investors who bought in at $10 a share are left holding the bag. Critics began to emerge, pointing out this fundamental flaw. The New Yorker would later characterize Chamath as a master of promoting SPAC mergers with optimistic growth narratives, glossing over the structural risks. He was selling a dream of democratization, but the architecture of the deal ensured the house always had an edge. He was the house. While he told the world he was fighting for the little guy, the structure of his deals ensured he would profit no matter what happened to them. The machine kept running, fueled by FOMO and a bull market that seemed like it would never end. But then came the company that would expose the entire game. In January 2021, the game reached its peak. Chamath's third SPAC, IPOC, merged with Clover Health, a company he sold as the future of American healthcare. The pitch was irresistible: an AI-powered insurance company that would use data to make healthcare cheaper and better for seniors. It debuted with a staggering $10 billion valuation. On Twitter and television, Chamath was a conquering hero. This wasn't just another tech company. This was a moral crusade. He was disrupting a broken system, and he was bringing retail investors along for the ride. The stock, which had been trading around the standard $10 SPAC price, shot up, eventually hitting nearly $28 a share. For a moment, it seemed like the SPAC King could do no wrong. The rocket emojis were flying. The little guy was winning. Then, on February 4th, 2021, the music stopped. Hindenburg Research, a firm known for exposing corporate fraud, dropped a bombshell report. The title was brutal: Clover Health, How the King of SPACs Lured Retail Investors into a Broken Business, Facing an Active, Undisclosed DOJ Investigation. The allegations were devastating. Hindenburg claimed Clover wasn't a disruptive tech company at all, but a glorified insurance seller that was misleading investors about its growth. More damningly, The report revealed that the Department of Justice was actively investigating Clover for its business practices, a fact that had never been disclosed to investors in any of the SPAC documents. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. Clover's stock began a relentless death spiral, plummeting from its highs toward just $4 a share. The dream of democratized finance turned into a nightmare. But the damage wasn't contained to Clover. The report cast a dark shadow over Chamath's entire SPAC empire. The magic was gone. Trust evaporated. Virgin Galactic, once the crown jewel, fell from a high of over $46 to just $5. Opendoor crashed from $30 to $5. SoFi, his fintech darling, tumbled from $25 down to $3. Billions of dollars in retail investor wealth were wiped out. The people who had cheered him on, who had bought into the story of a populist hero fighting for them, were crushed. Congressional hearings followed, with lawmakers scrutinizing the very structure of SPACs and the ways they left retail investors vulnerable. And the most damning detail to emerge was the one at the heart of the Hindenburg report. Chamath had known about the DOJ's investigation into Clover Health before the merger went through, yet he failed to disclose it. This wasn't just an oversight. It was a potential securities violation, a betrayal of the very investors he claimed to champion. He had sold them a story of transparency and access, while hiding the most critical risks. The SPAC machine ground to a halt. In September 2022, two of his remaining SPACs, IPOD and IPOF, officially gave up. They liquidated without ever finding a company to merge with. Investors got their initial money back, but after years of waiting in a historic bull market, the opportunity cost was massive. And what was Chamath's response to the carnage? Mostly silence. An occasional defensive tweet, but no apology, no accountability. It didn't matter. He had already found his next act. As his SPAC empire crumbled and retail investors nursed their losses, Chamath was already building his escape hatch. He didn't need Wall Street anymore. He had found a new stage, one with a much larger audience. In 2020, he launched the All In podcast with his friends, fellow tech investors Jason Calacanis, David Sachs, and David Friedberg. It was an immediate sensation. 4 billionaires, self-proclaimed besties, talking tech, politics, and markets with unfiltered candor. The chemistry was undeniable. And in this new arena, Chamath crafted his most compelling persona yet, the contrarian truth-teller. He was the populist billionaire, a man of the people who just happened to have a private jet. He railed against the establishment, against the systems of power he knew so intimately, all while being a card-carrying member of the 1%. For millions of listeners, it was intoxicating. He sounded like the smartest guy in the room, the one who wasn't afraid to say what everyone else was thinking. But the performance had its limits. In January 2022, his unfiltered style finally crossed the line. On the podcast, he casually dismissed the genocide of the Uyghur minority in China. "Nobody cares about what's happening to the Uyghurs," he said. The backlash was swift and severe. The Golden State Warriors, where he was a minority owner, were forced to publicly distance themselves. He eventually sold his stake in the team. But here's the fascinating part. The controversy didn't sink him, it fueled him. The podcast's audience exploded. He had become an anti-hero, and his influence only grew. This is where the pivot became a full-blown reinvention. The lifelong Democratic donor, who once praised politicians like Ted Cruz and Michael Bloomberg, suddenly shifted his allegiance. He began aligning with the very political forces he once seemed to oppose. By 2024, the transformation was complete. Alongside his co-host David Sachs, Chamath co-hosted a lavish $12 million fundraiser for Donald Trump in the heart of San Francisco. The message was clear. He was now a soldier in the populist war against the elite. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. The man whose SPACs had incinerated billions in retail investor wealth was now positioning himself as their champion. He was fighting the system from his family office, a private investment firm with zero accountability to the public. He was a man of the people who had just bought a $75 million private jet. In his 2024 annual letter, he warned of China's growing threat and framed himself as a patriot. He launched a new venture, 8090, promising to rebuild enterprise software with AI. And then, in a move that proved the game never really ends, he was back. In September 2025, he launched the American Exceptionalism Acquisition Corp., a brand new SPAC that raised $345 million. The target? Energy, AI, and defense. The cycle was beginning all over again. The SPAC King was dead. Long live the king. He had a new story, a new audience, and a new pile of cash. The past was just a prologue. So, what is the truth about Chamath Palihapitiya? When you look back, the through line is clear. He has always been a master of narrative control. At Facebook, he was the growth hacker who built the machine, only to later confess its sins and position himself as the repentant insider. At Social Capital, he was the venture capitalist with a conscience, the one who would fix capitalism from within. During the SPAC boom, he was the populist hero, democratizing wealth for the little guy. And on the All In podcast, he's the contrarian billionaire, fighting an establishment he belongs to. Each persona serves the moment. Each narrative serves his interests. This control extends beyond his business ventures. His 2018 divorce from Bridget Lau, his co-founder at Social Capital, saw her quietly disappear from his public story. In 2023, he married Natalie Dompe, an Italian pharmaceutical executive, and fully embraced the life of a global power player. He bought a $75 million Bombardier Global 7500 private jet, a stark contrast to the man of the people brand he was cultivating for millions of podcast listeners. The lifestyle simply doesn't match the populist rhetoric. But here's what's truly fascinating. He might actually believe his own story. To understand Chamath, you have to go back to that kid on welfare, with an alcoholic father, working at Burger King at 14. That experience forged an immigrant hustle mentality that never, ever turns off. It created a deep, visceral need for validation. Perhaps the ultimate prize he's chasing isn't money. It's being right. It's the feeling of being the smartest guy in the room, the one who saw the angle nobody else did, the one who could beat the system. From this perspective, the SPACs weren't a deliberate con. They were a massive, ambitious bet on his own ability to pick winners. A bet that ultimately failed. He was so sure he could outsmart Wall Street that he built a vehicle where he couldn't lose. But his retail followers paid the price for his failed prophecy. They were the collateral damage in his quest to prove he was the exception to every rule. This brings up the essential question. Does good intention matter when the outcome is billions in losses for the people who trusted you? Does the sincerity of the storyteller absolve him of the damage his story caused? In the end, Chamath Palihapitiya didn't fool Wall Street. Wall Street knew exactly what SPACs were, a game tilted in the sponsor's favor. He didn't fool the institutions. He fooled the retail investors who desperately wanted to believe his story of democratization. And maybe, most profoundly, he fooled himself into thinking he was different from the other billionaires he so often criticized. The 2025 reality is he's still playing the game, still raising SPACs, and still warning us about the very systems he profits from. The final, dark truth is that he told us exactly who he was back in 2017. He never hid. We just wanted to believe the story.